Hi, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Blake Connie. I'm one of the Safe Schools consultants at KDE, and Safe Schools reporting, Safe Schools data falls under one of my areas. And so I just want to get this information out to everybody. Much of it is similar to previous years, although there are a few changes this year. So I work with Wendy. She is the data manager / expert and apparently has KAR memorized. So if you ever have a KAR question, she can give you that number off the top of her head, which is super impressive. So the audience for today are really looking for administrators, anyone that works with Safe Schools data, whether that's entry or reviewing the data. There are a list of resources there, and I will pop them into the soapbox. But the KDE Safe Schools data collection website, which is that second link, has links to everything on this page and more. So anyone that has questions about Safe Schools data or the Safe Schools report should go to the KDE website. It's very helpful, and again, has access to everything we're talking about today and a whole lot more. If there's anyone that needs access to Safe Schools data, the person role manager is how we send out our communications, and so we send out through anyone that has has been granted access at the district level. To access Safe Schools, the path is you go to Kentucky KY state reporting, and you go to the state schools report or Safe Schools report. You want to make sure that, again, everyone in your district, so talking to district personnel now, you want to make sure that everyone that needs access to it, whether it's a school administrator or someone at central office, has access to the Safe Schools data. We recommend that you generate these reports often to look for errors. It is vital to find those early on, because anyone that's worked with data knows, or behavior data, a huge event happens, you think you're going to remember all the details, and then a few weeks later, you can't remember what happened. So it's really important to go through and catch those errors early while the information is fresh, and you're able to make adjustments early rather than wait till the end of the school year. Data is also great just for monitoring what's happening at the school level and putting interventions in place or making decisions for what's best for students. And then obviously at the end of the year, you'll have to review that data, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. The Safe Schools report, based on legislation, there are things that we have to report on, and the behavior events that are included in the Safe Schools report are assault and violence, bullying and harassment, any type of drugs, alcohol, or tobacco, including vaping, and then weapons of any sort. The resolutions, so based on, for any event, the resolutions that are also included on the Safe Schools report include expulsions with or without services, out-of-school suspensions, in-school or in-district removals, and in-district is new in the last couple of years. Any type of restraint or seclusion. If your district still uses corporal punishment, that's also included. And then also new is the interim alternative education setting removal. And so that's for special education students who are removed for a very specific reason. And we'll talk about that in a few. Something that's great for any district special ed personnel, the director of special ed, is if you can filter the data by checking the box for active special ed students at the time of incident. By checking that box, you can review data just for students that have IEPs, and again, especially for directors of special education, this would be how you most likely want to review your school data or district data. Anytime there's there's errors that will pop up, and we're going to go through those errors in just a few minutes. They must be resolved. If they're not resolved, the data does not appear on the report. So the error log is very specific and gives you pretty clear direction how to resolve the issue. and we're going to review that. There's also a hyperlink, which again tells you, gives you follow-up of where the error is and how to resolve it. And so this is kind of hard to see, but this is what an error report might look like. Again, each of those are hyperlinked. We're going to go through each of these different errors one at a time, but this is what you would see if there was an error. So error 01, so this is when there's a state resolution with or without a start or end time. So again, all results or resolutions must have a start and end. And so that again is an easy fix. You add the timing into it. Error 03, so events do not have a participant selected. So sometimes, a teacher I've seen it where a teacher will put the name of the student in the actual write-up rather than connect it to a student or to a participant. So if that ever happens or there just isn't a participant selected, this error will pop up. Again, it's important to catch these things early because you'll see an incident and you may or may not remember, who was involved, months down the road. Error 4, so if there's an event or an incident that occurs outside of the calendar of enrollment, so the student must be enrolled in the district at the time of the incident. And sometimes an event happens and a parent says, "I'm done pulling my kid out," and so if the event is put in the next day or later on, it may not overlap with the student's enrollment. So again, you just want to make sure you double check that, and you may have to go back to see when the student was enrolled to make sure it matches. If there is a suspension, so when a attendance report is done for that student, if they are marked as suspended on the attendance side of things, but there is not a suspension resolution or SSP3 connected to that student, there will be an error. And so you want to make sure you go back and there could be an error. The fault could be on the attendance side of things where a student was marked as suspended, or it could be that behavior resolution wasn't put in properly. Either way, it needs to be fixed. But they're saying there's an overlap there where there's some type of missing data. So if a student this error is for students that have a behavior response of restraint or seclusion, but there is not a corresponding resolution. So restraint and seclusion requires it to be entered in two different places. It must be entered in as a resolution, like you would put any other resolution, lunch detention, suspension, etc. So there must be a restraint and seclusion resolution. There also needs to be a behavior response, and that's where you put more of the legal documents of documenting the type of restraint, the timing of it, and all those things that are required. And those go into the response. So if there is a response but not a resolution, this error would pop up. And so again, you have to go back and make sure that you've entered in, and there may be multiple resolutions for one event. So restraint seclusion may have been used, and then the student may have been suspended or put into detention. So whatever it is, it's possible to put multiple resolutions for one event, and anytime restraint seclusion is used, it has to be a resolution as well as a response. I'm going to check the questions real quick. Nothing so far. So error 07 is, this is new. So, all right, we've got a new resolution. So this is for interim alternative educational settings. So this is students that are only for students that have IEPs, and they can be placed in an alternate or interim alternate education setting for specific reasons. Typically, those reasons are the those big events that fall under the Safe Schools data. So, you know, a threat to others, weapon, drugs. Students with IEPs can be placed into that interim alternative setting. And I'm going to drop guidance right now into the soapbox because again, this is a new resolution and there's new information on this.
I'm going to jump in real quick. Blake, like Blake said, this is a new error that our Office of Special Education asked to be added to the Safe Schools report. The key here is an interim alternative educational setting resolution cannot exceed 45 school days. So now if someone accidentally puts in this resolution for longer than the 45 days, this is actually what that error is going to give the user. And as Blake alluded to, these are very specific only for special education students with an IEP and those that an incident in which there is drugs, weapons, or serious bodily injury. So I think, like Blake said, he's going to put into the chat the specifics on these types of resolutions. And that is also linked within our behavior data standards.
And so yeah, I dropped it into the soapbox. Again, it gives you the specific criteria that needs to be followed and guidance for this resolution. So WA1, this is for when out of school suspension is outside of the suspension attendance. So if the suspension was put for days that the student was not in attendance or school was out that day, this is the error that will pop up. So again, either the dates of attendance need to be adjusted or the days of suspension need to be adjusted so that they match.
I would add to that real quick. That's a warning. So we've transitioned from errors to warnings. So errors have to be addressed for the record to be included in Safe Schools. Warnings are those that need to be reviewed, data anomalies that need to be reviewed, but the records will still be created on Safe Schools. With this one in particular, attendance, check-in, check-out is the authoritative source. So if you're receiving this warning, then you need to make sure that your attendance start and end times, dates and times match the resolution start and end dates and times. And again, the check-in, check-out is your authoritative source for that.
And actually, Wendy, while you're here, I'm going to ask, there's a question in the soapbox. So does an ARC have to make that 45-day placement?
Yes, that is determined by an ARC has to be involved in that decision. Yes. I think we have another question too, if we want to go ahead and address it.
Yeah.
Dual enrolled students with an out of school suspension are producing an error in school with secondary enrollment. How do I clear? Again, it would not be an error. It would be a warning. So in the secondary school, you would disregard the warning. And I'll add the answers to the Go Soapbox.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so warning 02, so behavior resolution of restraint seclusion without a behavior response. So again, the resolution was put in as restraint seclusion used, but it is missing the behavior response, which again is kind of that paperwork that needs to be done after restraint seclusion, including the type of restraint, timing, and those details. Warning 3, so resolution start date is not within the district enrollment. So once again, it just either there's some type of error there, or the student was left the district enrollment, so it just needs to be adjusted. Either the resolution or double check that the enrollment is correct. All right. So we're talking about kind of reviewing Safe Schools data. So when you, again, go to the pathway and pull the Safe Schools data report from Infinite Campus, you want to review any kind of outliers or things that just don't seem right. This is kind of I'll say the common sense test here. So you want to filter like arrests. And so anytime when you're filtering for number 1, it means it was marked yes. So arrest was marked as a resolution. Or behavior response. So if you filter arrest, you want to kind of scan down there. Hopefully there's not a ton for your district. But things that might stand out would be a really young student arrested, or an arrest and the event was say talking or out of turn, or what I mean. So you just want to make sure that there's you're just looking for some of the most extreme responses to make sure they match up and wasn't accidentally marked in the system. You can filter event codes for like assault violations to make sure that the responses are accurate. A kindergartner would be a pretty rare assault. Not to say it can't happen, but again, you just want to kind of scan down, look through the spreadsheet of data to make sure that when you're looking at some of the extreme Safe Schools data, everything kind of matches up. And this is an easier way to do that. You can do sub-reports. So in the Safe Schools report, you can pull sub-reports for weapons just to double check to make sure that the type of weapon was selected, to make sure that you probably won't see lunch detention as a resolution for some type of weapon brought to school. When you look for tobacco or alcohol, you want to make sure that the correct drug type was selected. There's a drop down whenever you select tobacco or alcohol, and you want to make sure that the correct drug was selected. Same thing with drugs. And when you're filtering by drugs, you want to make sure that it's not an overlap of tobacco or alcohol, but another type of drug, since it has its own they have their own categories. Again, when you're reviewing this data, again, hopefully not waiting until the end of the school year when it's due, but throughout the year, while things are still fairly fresh in the administrators' minds or teachers' minds. You can ensure that restraint seclusion, that the lengths are appropriate. You can filter by expulsion without services to make sure that none of the students have an IEP. So probably just gonna be a few students each year that match that, or none, hopefully. But you want to make sure that none of those students show up with an IEP. You want to make sure that corporal punishment is not selected as a resolution unless your district still has policy allowing for such. But we all make mistakes when we enter data because it's timely. There's a lot of boxes to check. These are just ways to go back after the fact to make sure that there's the wrong box wasn't selected. You want to make sure that expulsions are limited to up to 1 year or 175 days. And out of school suspensions, the resolution dates should be within 10 days. You can pull an aggregate report. So districts or schools can pull the aggregate Safe Schools report to look at their own data. This is also a way to double check the state reported school report card data to make sure that it's accurate. So when you're reviewing over the summer, typically, you can pull your aggregate report for your district and compare it to the Safe Schools report data that comes to you. And just sometimes there's some confusion of how data is used or how this Safe Schools data is used. I know as a previous in a building administrator, I was always worried about my data showing up on a state report or standing out. But ultimately, it's more important to have accurate data put into the system than it is because the way we use the report or the data is it is publicly reported on the school report card. We report the data goes to the Kentucky Center for School Safety. It is gone to the Education Accountability. The Legislative Research Commission goes annually. We produce the Safe Schools Annual Statistical Report, which is published on our website and sent to the Kentucky Center for School Safety, which just has, again, all those safe schools behavior violations broken down by race, by gender, by socioeconomic status. It really is an interesting report to see some of the standouts and some of the areas that the data highlights on the state level. You compare that to your own data to see if you are, ahead of the curve or not. And then we have to report federally student data for students with disabilities. So any student with an IEP, we report discipline and removal at the federal level. The reporting timeline, so we're kind of right in the middle of it right now. We're coming up to it. So schools should generate their own reports and work to resolve those resolutions. Again, the easiest way is to spit it out of Infinite Campus into a CSV, put it into Excel and start filtering out, filter resolutions to make sure there's no blanks, filter student participants to make sure there's no blanks. As I said before, look at some of those extreme events like, assaults, out of school suspensions to make sure that it passes the common sense test. And June 30th, the superintendent and director of special ed have to verify the data accuracy. KDE extracts it on July 5th. That then goes into that data goes to the school report card, goes to the annual Safe Schools Statistical Report. And then July 31st is when the district and school review and aggregate school report card it must be completed at that point. Checking the question soapbox. Don't think anything new came in. Unfortunately, it's not always in the chronological order.
Yeah, that keeps us on our toes because if somebody bumps it up in priority as far as number, it goes up the list. It makes it kind of hard.
Yeah. So it's kind of
find those, but do you think you've covered all the questions at this point? I lost track, so I have to apologize for that.
So at this point, we've covered all the questions in the soapbox. If there's any other questions, now would be a time to pop them in. Let's see.
Wendy did just click add. I think she's adding some resources in Go Box. So just give her a minute, and there's a one that says resources. I think you'll be able to click down in there and copy any resources that are there. You've also got probably some links out of this PowerPoint presentation if you've got the electronic copy too.
Yeah, I'm just adding in a few of the resources, and unfortunately it doesn't look pretty, so you'll have to copy and paste into a web browser, but some resources that Blake has mentioned throughout his presentation.
And Wendy, if you're able to speak to the
Yes.
carryover of expulsions, that's something that you're probably more adept to than I am. So this is the last bit of information for everyone.
Okay. So we have received, and when I say we, I'm talking about myself and Blake, and then our friends in the attendance world here at KDE, Josh Whitlow and Jesse Carlton. A lot of questions recently on expulsion, expulsion within the current year and expulsion within a carryover, which can mean the expulsion is carried over to another school within the same district, or has been carried over because the student has moved from this district to another district, and most commonly because an expulsion can last for up to 1 year. Most often expulsions will carry over into the next school year. So We have expanded the current document that we had for specifically carryover expulsions to include resources, details, and instruction on behavior and attendance for expulsions within the current year and a carryover year. So we sent this document out a couple of weeks ago. It went to the Safe Schools administrators. It went to KSIS points of contacts, and it went to directors of pupil personnel. So some of you guys may have received it more than once, but it is also linked within our data standards and on our KDE Safe Schools data collection webpage. But basically, again, like I said, it gives the very detailed instructions for current year expulsions and carryover expulsions, and what needs to be done. So please make sure, if you are a district level staff that received that guidance, if you could share that with your school level staff that actually enter the data. Expulsions with services, of course, happen much more frequently than expulsions without services. And note, expulsion without services cannot be given to a student with special education or an IEP. But those expulsions are, a district is eligible for up to 175 days of an attendance adjustment on their SAR. So it's very important to make sure that you do enter the information correctly in Infinite Campus through the resolution particularly, but also when trying to track attendance on those expelled students. Another key is with an expelled student is the student must continue to have a full schedule. So all of that information, like I said, is within that document. It is a working document. So if you read it and something's not clear, please reach out to myself or Blake and we'll be glad to help you. We can also, there's room for improvement within the document. We can make updates and send that back out to the districts. But we just had found that there was a lot of questions coming in. I mean, in the past couple of years with COVID, obviously behavior events were decreased, and there definitely was not near many, if any, expulsions. So I think it's kind of like it's kind of bubbled back up as options and needs to do. So hopefully this guidance will help with that. Does anybody have any questions on expulsions or carryover expulsions that they'd like me to address?
There's nothing now, but we can give it a little bit. See, we're up against a break, so if
okay,
we need, if you all wrap things up and we want to go ahead and take a couple minutes before the break, that's fine too.
Okay, that document that I mentioned also has some frequently asked questions in it, so some question answer things as well. If anybody has any questions for me and Blake, we're always available via email or phone, and our extensions and email addresses are listed there on this page. I'll put a plug out always to share your data standards documents with people in your district that need to know how to enter data or review reporting. And also all these resources that we discussed and have posted in the Go Soapbox are included in the data standards as links.
Thank you both for presenting today. Good information. And I think at this point, I don't see any other questions coming in. I'm dragging this out a little bit just in case somebody does have one. But if you do think of something after the fact, don't worry. We'll be watching this throughout the presentation today into the afternoon. So if you have something to add, we'll get it answered out in the Go Soapbox application.